Hi, I'm Cal Morgan from Riverhead Books, and I'm here with our friend Brandon Taylor, the author of Real Life. Brandon, welcome.
Hi, Cal. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Most of the reading world knows by now that this year, which has been so strange in so many ways, has had at least one bright spot, which is that Real Life, this debut novel of love and violence in and around a Midwestern university campus, has been named a finalist for the Booker Prize. We've all been thrilled to watch this novel, which is so intimate, emotionally nuanced, acutely observed, and also really sharply funny, be embraced by people on both sides of the pond, from readers like Roxane Gay here to the late night icon Graham Norton in the UK. Very cool, very big deal over there. Brandon, first of all, tell me a little bit about like what the reception has been like to you. What, not so much. I mean, we all know what we've seen in the reviews, but I'm really curious to hear from you what you've heard from readers. You know, people, you're fairly transparent. People see you online, people get to you one way or another. I want to know what's hit them and what they've told you about what the book's done for them.
Well, I mean, the thing that has been most surprising is the sheer number of scientists who have read the book. When I was a scientist, I would often be told, like, oh, scientists don't read fiction. That's not a thing to do. But the number of scientists and people who work in academia who have found the book and not only found it, but like found it to be like a fairly true to life portrait of like what that life is like. Hearing from them has meant the world to me because, in some ways, this is like my love letter, a complicated love letter of sorts, like to science and into that world. So that's been amazing. And then just the number of people who've said that the book has made them feel less alone in the world and like someone sees them and everything. And so that's just been, I mean, a writer's dream come true.
You know, it's funny that you say that about science. I'm working with a writer now who we were talking the other day about how there's this almost sort of feeling among writers and people who are kind of trying to think broadly about the world and the kind of dire straits that we're all in, of trying to save science as a thing of value and as a point of honor, and there's probably a little bit of that in that, you know, the people who are reading this book who see themselves in one or many of your characters, who feel seen and validated.
Yeah, I mean, science, I think people often get the wrong idea about science. I think it's a bunch of like people in white coats, like pouring things into beakers and like that's all it is. But I found science to be like a really diverse group of people who are passionate about saving the world, who are passionate about microbes and who are passionate about trying to figure out the mysteries of the universe. And it's a really young space. There are a lot of young scientists and young scientists of color, especially, who are doing, I think, a lot of that work to make science a more vital and lively space. And yeah, I mean, it's been amazing to see this book become a part of those conversations.
Yeah. A kind of a related thing that comes up a lot. It was a thing that the Booker people mentioned pointedly, and it comes up in a lot of the reviews. Is this idea of Real Life as reinventing the campus novel?
Mm.
You know, as many people know, it's set in a town based in Madison, Wisconsin, where you went to school. And if I'm not wrong, you're talking to me now from Iowa City. Is that, did I assume that's correct?
Yes, yep.
All of which makes me want to get you talking about college towns. I grew up in a college town. I think it's clearly such a sort of an engine of imagination and narrative for you. Talk to me a little bit about like what's the magic and what's the kind of secret dark side of college town.
Well, I've spent so much time now for the past, I think, 7 or 8 years I've spent in Midwestern college towns. And I kind of love them. When I lived in Madison, I would explain it to people as like a really good starter city. It's like not too big and it's not too small. It's the state capital, so there's this huge, presence from like the state government, so politicians, bankers, tech people. Like it's this wonderful cross section of different kinds of industries. And so I think of the campus as being a lot like that, actually. Like a campus town or a college town is a place where you get all of these people coming to a relatively small town, what would be a small town in any other circumstance. All these people from like New York and from Portland and from small towns in Alabama and from small towns across the state of Wisconsin, even. You get this cross section of people from different walks of life and from different parts of the world and the country sort of brought together. So it's like this incredibly diverse, like cauldron of human experience. And so then you get all these different people and you put them together under this incredibly artificial construct that
Right.
is like the contemporary university where people are coming to learn, to learn about the world, but also about themselves, to figure out like what they want to do with their life. And it's kind of a proving ground. I think your first true proving ground of late adolescence and adulthood is those late college years when you're kind of like, okay, I have received an education of a sort. So like, what am I going to do? It's the time in your life when those questions about what a life is become less abstract and more concrete and meaningful. Literally, like, what am I going to do? Like, what is my job going to be? What is my career going to be? And so like that's one end of like what makes a college town so interesting, is that you have people becoming themselves, and on the other hand you have people coming into contact with people who are unlike them, perhaps for the first time in their lives. I taught a class when I was in Madison, and I was teaching people who were from like the most rural of Wisconsin towns, who wanted to be dentists and doctors, who are maybe going to go back to their small communities and be doctors, but now having encountered like a black gay man from the South for the first time in their lives. I mean, it was just like a really, really rich and novel space. And it's full of drama. Like the town and gown always interests me. The tensions between the university and the people who live there and who were born there and whose parents were there, etc. Like that's always fascinating to me. And so I think a college town makes explicit several of the tensions that already run through our society, and you get to see them play out in a way that you would only ever get to see on television. So it's
Well, and people are also they're at that point where they are at a crisis point in deciding what to do with their vulnerability, right? They are coming out of adolescence, which is just full of bruises all day long, and they're trying to decide whether the adolescent them is still going to survive, or whether they will have successfully built a carapace that's going to protect them, whether they can negotiate those both while at the same time trying to form relationships, in a very heady way.
yeah, I mean, I feel like when I went away to college, I became a different person. And then when I went away to graduate school, I became yet a different person. And when I left that grad school to go to Iowa City for other grad school, I became yet one more abstraction of my of myself. And it's interesting. I do think that because you sort of go through your childhood, and in many ways your family is like there to tell you who you are and like what you're like and et cetera. And that's why we all experience that weird vertigo of reversion when we're back among our family. It's like, who is this person that I am? But I think that when you go away, and like when you do find yourself in like a college town, or when you find yourself emerging into adulthood, and suddenly your parents aren't there necessarily to tell you who you are anymore. Your family isn't there to sort of reinforce these myths and stories about you. And so suddenly your identity is this incredibly fungible, curious construct, and you have all this power to make of it what you will. And what do you do with all those bruises that you've gotten just going through the collision course that is coming of age? Like, are you going to like hold on to those bruises? Are you going to shed them? Are you going to shed them for reasons of self-preservation, or just because you want to reinvent yourself? I think that it's all of those questions which to me feel not only in late adolescence, early adulthood, but which feel like especially important in that period of your life, like those are all really interesting to me. And maybe it's because I'm now like sliding out of that phase into the sort of adulthood, but I find it just like really fascinating. It's like we're all sort of becoming who we are by breaking down old versions and scrapping them for new people that we hope to become.
Right, right. Well, one of the places that where that kind of collision happens, and that self measuring happens, and obviously where relationships are built or fractured or what have you, is the dinner party, the party, there are all these kind of wonderful group settings in the novel, where a lot of things that are genuinely funny happen. And one of the sort of interesting things that I've noticed about the book, and you've talked about it too in interviews, is that this is a book a lot of people have been tempted to compare with James Baldwin, but where you know, have made the point that it probably has more in common, or at least as much in common, with Sally Rooney. And that, you know, and I know just from your other reading and things that you've written about having devoured as a reader, that you're very interested in the sort of the social aspects of the novel, and what you can do with the portrait of social interaction in fiction and the humor that comes from that.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious how you thought about what humor was going to, you know, what place humor was going to have in this novel as you were writing it. I mean, did you set out to write a you know, serious novel and the humor just comes out around the surface, or was it a tool you were always aware that you would have at your disposal to do certain things for the characters?
Mm. I mean, I used to write, this will shock no one, but I used to write very dour stories about gay French boys whose fathers made them take a lot of therapy and who smoked a lot of cigarettes. And my friends would always say, like, Brandon, you're so funny. You like to laugh. You laugh so much. Why are you always acting like someone from an Edith Piaf song? Like, why are you always, like, why are you over here like je ne veux pas travailler? Like that's not the vibe. And for me, like I just like didn't know how to write funny. Like I just didn't know how one would do that because I was like, literature is serious. Like look at Sartre, although Sartre is
Right.
I find South incredibly funny sometimes. Maybe
Yeah.
that's my age
Come
speak.
on, Beckett is funny.
I mean, it really, but I didn't have access to that register in my own work. And it wasn't until I started watching more television that I was like, oh, like the way humor gets in is through like dialogue and through contrast and through allowing the reader to kind of see around characters. So like you can use humor as a kind of appeal to pathos in some ways. And so I was really bad at writing funny things until I got better at dialogue. And then the humor just naturally started coming into it because I do find human situations like ridiculous. Like I've been to a lot of ridiculous dinner parties, and my favorite part of that is just watching people just pretend that they aren't incredibly awkward, like awkward people trying to do what real quote unquote like real people do.
Right.
And that's like really funny to me because I'm like, why are we all straining so hard all the time to, sort of put on our best human face? So
How
the
mysterious would it be to meet a person who's actually adept and comfortable in those settings? I've never met one.
I have a good friend of mine, and every time we go to like a group thing together, we spend 35 minutes after the fact just debriefing. Like, can you believe that there are people who know how to like be functional at a party? Like we are just constantly baffled by it. And so I think that's where I love stories that allow the reader to see into the artifice, even if the characters can't see into the sort of artificiality of human encounters. I love stories that allow me as a reader to see into it. And I think Jane Austen is really brilliant at that. I think Elif Batuman, her great novel, The Idiot, was just sublime. A sublime novel about a person who doesn't realize they're hilarious, bumping into all the sort of sharp corners
Right.
of human interaction. And so that's what I mean, I think that humor is a part of the human condition and that you don't have to be so serious all of the time in order to take your characters or their lives seriously. And just everyday life is so full of just the comedy of existence. Like it's just I mean it's kind of funny that we just like wake up every day and we like don't know when the last time that we're going to wake up is. Like that is just like an inherently comedic like proposition. And so the humor I think is just there because that is life, and it would have felt false to me to write Wallace without a sense of humor because I find Wallace has like a very keen sense of humor. He's such an astute social observer of a character, and I find that people who are really good observers of the world often have the best senses of humor because it's how could you not laugh? You either laugh or become a philosopher in some way.
But it's interesting too because he's almost like a character who he has an acute sense of humor, but he is playing with a very sharp set of knives in that sense of humor, and they are, and so they're integral to the story that way because there are a few things that turn on stuff that among all the characters started out being jokes and then end up becoming super serious and scary really quickly. And so one of the things I loved about the book is the way it shows that things, humor that starts out as defense mechanism or as kind of self-framing in a social setting can suddenly become really lethal or really treacherous.
Yeah, I mean, who amongst us has not had the friend who said the really awful thing and then was like, haha, get it, it's a joke. But like it clearly was not a joke. I mean, I think part of that comes from my own, I don't know any other way to have a sense of humor. Like I don't know the sense of humor that isn't also capable, or if you read it flat, it would be a devastating truth. Like I don't know any other way of being, because I mean, in my family, people would just cut each other to the bone with these horribly true observations
Right.
that, if said with a slightly different rhythm, would be awful and like brutal. And I have friends who sometimes when I'm joking, I'll do like a little impression of someone, and I've had friends start laughing and then say with dead seriousness, I hope you never do that to me, you are terrified. You're terrified, you see everything. And I'm like, I don't, it's a joke. And they're just like, it now it's a joke, but is it always?
Right. Right. You mentioned a minute ago, and I'm so glad that you started to go there because I'm going to make you go there a little further. TV. And like, well, people who know you from online, and a lot of people do, um, know that you've got this kind of voracious kind of narrative appetite where one minute you may be spending a week reading Jane Austen, you may be watching Billions. These days, you've been watching a lot of Law and Order, which I want to grill you about. But you also then, on top of all that, you play these super intense games that I don't understand at all. And what I'm curious about with all of this is whether, when you're doing that, are you there doing it in part because your kind of story building brain wiring is getting off on it, or are you, escaping from being a fiction writer when you're doing that and just enjoying somebody else doing the work? I'm really curious.
Oh, that's a good question. I think yes, there's a part of me that is just like, ooh, I love all these. I love building the narrative of like the games I find myself drawn to are these sort of real-time strategy games set in like historical context. And so I love starting a game as like a little like the Count of Anjou and sort of building a huge family dynasty that rules all of Europe over the course of like 800 years of time. Like that's just like a thing I enjoy because I'm also in my spare time a deeply nerdy history devourer. I love sort
Right?
of
Yeah.
especially early modern history. And so, like when I'm watching TV or playing Crusader Kings 3 or things like that, I am sort of just it's sort of tickling that overly developed narrative part of my brain. And it's a lot of fun to sort of imagine like, like I can't just watch TV. When I watch Law and Order, for example, I'm like, okay, but like what about this person whose day they've just ruined by asking for all of these records to be faxed over? Like there's a person who's got to do that job.
Right.
What is their life like? So like, yes, the part of my brain that is a fiction writer and that loves narrative, I'm always sort of unspooling narrative. And I used to try to turn that part of my brain off more because I'd be in lab inoculating bacteria and I'd be like, all of these hundreds of millions of civilizations I'm destroying by inoculating.
Oh, that's where the
Yeah,
role playing game thing comes in.
you know
You're just
it.
sweeping civilizations
Yeah,
aside.
it was every, and I had that thought every single time I pelleted cultures, with like, all of these cultures I'm pelleting to the bottom and I'm going to rip out their DNA and harvest them and kill them. And like I would sort of start spinning narratives. And so I tried to like shut it down. But what I found was that it felt like the world was less bright when I didn't do that. Like the world was less available to me without that part of my brain that's always building narrative and having fun unspooling it. And so I just let it ride. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's fine. I can live with it now. I'm not pelleting bacteria anymore, so it's not as it's not as possible. But I mean that. But for me, that is my escapism. Like there are some people who there are some writers who are like, I don't like reading can't be my hobby because I'm a writer now and I have to read for work and yada yada yada. But like I don't feel that way. Like writing and reading to me are my primary interest. They're the things I love to do. And I don't feel like I need to make apologies or try to be a more interesting person than I am just because I don't want people on Twitter to think that I'm a nerd. Like, I love to read books, I love to make narrative, and I like that is also my hobby. And I feel like I used to have a whole separate other life, and I'm tired. Like, I'm tired of having to sustain two versions of myself, and so I'm just saving string, honestly.
I love this. This is very holistic. I feel you've come to be at one with yourself. It's a
Yeah,
lesson for us all. Listen, this has been an enormous amount of fun. Thank you so much. I know we've all been in 10 million Zoom calls lately, but it's fun to do a one-on-one. I enjoyed it.
it's always great to talk to you, Cal.
You too. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, bye-bye.